Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Heritage Auction Galleries. Thrilled to have you here tonight for yet another Second Tuesday's lecture. We enjoy having you here once a month. Always try to bring in some good entertainment. Tonight you're going to really enjoy Empires of Mystery. At any rate, those of you who've come in early and started looking around, we've had a busy week of sales this week. Yesterday was fine silver. It was only 86% sold, so there's 14% of property out there that's still available for sale. So if you like what you see, you can ask us if it's still available, or go on to our website, which is ha.com. Click on silver, and you can go to post-auction buys, and it lists anything that's still available. Today, decorative arts. We had some great successes. There's a mosaic table in the back, sold for $150,000 hammer, not bad. Interesting furniture units in the back. The bronzes throughout went through the roof, a lot of European buyers. But there are a few things that didn't make it to a buyer, and you can check those out too. And the paintings that are in most of this room and in the front gallery tomorrow, American and European paintings. Check them out, place a bid. The sale will start at 10 a.m. We'd love to have you. If you can't come in person, you should know we also do phone bids. For those of you who are new, we do phone bids. You can leave absentee bids, or you can log on to ha.com and use our tool. It's called Heritage Live. You can bid from almost anywhere in the world, also your iPhones, simply by signing in as a member and pressing Submit Bid. So American and European paintings tomorrow. I had to do a little spiel for this week. The few paintings in the front here are an assortment that are in our upcoming Western Art and Texas Art sale. November 20th, a week from Saturday. It will preview the 15th to the 20th. If you want to come to that Saturday sale, we put on a barbecue at 11:30 and the sale starts at 12:30. Some of you have, we've gotten a lot of press recently. Dallas Morning News, page 3 recently on Election Day. The Henry McCardle painting called Battle of San Jacinto is a beautiful historical painting, 1903, found in an attic in West Virginia. They called us up, and this artist had painted many of the murals in the Austin courthouse. We are offering the lost painting that's been found on November 20th. I'm sure you'll read about it. Come and see it. Have some fun. Thank you for listening, and with that, it's my pleasure to turn the mic over to David Michaels to talk about the age of Alexander the Great. Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Ed. By way of introduction, my name is David Michaels. I've been with Heritage since May. I am their expert on ancient coins, by which meaning really old coins back down to the age of Christ and even a few hundred years before. It took a very special incident to get me interested in ancient coins. Back when I've been interested in the ancient world ever since I was 6 or 7 years old. I saw the movie Cleopatra. And I remember, I have very dim recollection of that time, but I do remember Roddy McDowell spearing Hume Cronin in one scene, just transfixing him with a spear, and that just completely riveted my attention, and I've been stuck on the ancient world ever since then. But it took one specific thing to get me interested in ancient coins, and I'm going to sort of touch on that today. So when they asked me for a topic, I thought, well, why not go back to that and sort of draw something out of it? One of the things that's always fascinated me is how coins can bring people together and how they are really emblems, really talismans of the culture that created them. And nothing really exemplifies that more than the Bactrian coins. So there's a saying that east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. Good as far as that goes, but there have been times in history when east and west have met, and they've mingled, and they've fought, but sometimes they've gotten along pretty well, and they've created some pretty interesting cultures. I'm going to start by reading a quote from a recent column, October 25th, by that great statesman of our times, George McGovern. You remember he's the guy that lost 49 states to Richard Nixon. This column, I quote, was touched on all the problems facing President Obama today. And he says, quote, "The cost of the war in Afghanistan, which is going into its 10th year, is difficult to calculate because it is still escalating. This is money that we are spending to pursue a war in a place where no invader has ever been successful. Not Alexander the Great, not the Mongolians, not the British, not the Russians." Now, it's true that the United States is engaged. It's in the 10th year of a very, very difficult war in Afghanistan. The outcome of that war is even now dancing on the edge of a sword. And while the debate about our involvement there still rages, no matter which side of it you're on, there's a truism has developed, a factoid, if you will, that Afghanistan is absolutely unconquerable, that it defeated Alexander the Great and every other foreign power that's ever tried to invade it. There's only one problem with that axiom. It's not true. At least in Alexander's case, it's dead wrong. Alexander the Great wasn't defeated when he invaded Afghanistan. In the 4th century BC, he invaded and conquered ancient Bactria, which is almost exactly contiguous to modern Afghanistan, and it remained under Greek rule for the next 2 centuries. Yes, it was a tough and bitter slog, toughest campaign he ever fought. But define success any way you will, 200 years of unbroken rule in a distant land has to count for something. And these Greek kings even expanded their realm beyond the Hindu Kush into northern India, almost unimaginably distant from their homeland. What's more, the Greek rulers of Bactria and northern India created something unique in history, a vibrant, diverse, and multinational society that fused the cultures of Europe, Iran, Central Asia, and India for one brief, shining moment. Now, from Alexander's arrival in Bactria down to 330 BC, down nearly to the birth of Christ, this remarkable and exotic cultural melting pot took root and thrived. And it was finally snuffed out, not by some kind of native uprising, but by another invasion. Today, only the faintest echoes of it survive. The history of these distant lands has been almost entirely erased. In all the records of all the ancient historians that wrote back in the ancient world, there's only a handful of words, fewer than 900 words, make any reference at all to this enormous kingdom that existed out there in the Far East. The cities have been swallowed by sand and scrub. The only thing that has survived in quantity is their coins that were struck by this civilization. And thousands upon thousands of them have survived. And they're amazing coins. There are incredible big silver pieces with portraits that are nearly photographic in their realism. If the king depicted on the coin walked in the room right now, you would immediately recognize him from his coin. But we know nothing else about most of these people. We just know exactly what they looked like. In some cases, we know a little about what they thought about themselves. All of these testify to the enormous wealth of land and the brilliance of the civilization that produced them. But the coins can only tell us so much. Of these rulers, we only know their names and their faces. But trying to reconstruct the history of this period is like trying to put a jigsaw puzzle, one of those gigantic, complicated jigsaw puzzles together when 90% of the pieces are missing. Well, let's go back to Alexander the Great. Here he is. This is from the famous mosaic that was found in Pompeii. And it was probably copied off of an actual Greek mural or painting. So this is probably a pretty fair likeness of Alexander the Great as the ancients remembered him. He was only 18 when he inherited the kingdom of Macedon from his father, Philip, in 336 BC. Philip had raised Macedon from a rustic backwater. It was in the northern hinterlands of Greece. It was always thought of as kind of backwards and rustic. But he built it into an unstoppable military machine. Here's a portrait coin of Alexander. Here he's depicted as Alexander the Great, wearing the lion skin headdress that Heracles. He's depicted as Hercules, wearing the lion skin headdress that Hercules adopted after he slew the Nemean lion. This is Philip of Macedon, his father. This is from a little ivory portrait bust that was found in the tomb of Virginia, which is thought to be the tomb of Philip of Macedon, Philip II, Philip the Great, as he ought to be called, because he was really, without Philip, there would have been no Alexander. Now, Philip created this unstoppable military machine. It was based around a hammer and an anvil. The anvil was this, the Macedonian phalanx. It was a superbly trained group of men, each wielding a pike that was 16 feet long. I belonged to a reenactment group. We actually, at one point, we created a small version of the Macedonian phalanx. And to get to be able to handle these enormous long spears, to be able to raise them and lower them, move them to the right, move them to the left, it's just the amount of training that would be involved in that is just almost inconceivable. And yet they raised it to a fine art. Any enemy that tried to attack this would be impinged on all this hedgehog of spears. In other words, this is the anvil. This would hold the enemy in place. This is the hammer, the cavalry, composed of tens of thousands of superbly trained horsemen, the best horsemen in the ancient world. While the enemy was preoccupied trying to carve their way through this forest of pikes, the cavalry would sweep around and hammer them to bits. And often it was led by Alexander the Great himself. There he is on his charger. Bucephalus, ox head is what his famous horse was named. Now, Alexander's career started when he inherited the throne, 336 BC. Not only did he inherit this marvelous military machine, he also inherited his father's vision, and that was to attack and to plunder the Persian Empire, which ruled this enormous area to the east of Greece. Persia had attacked Greece in the previous century, but if not for the Athenian navy at Salamis and for the army at Marathon and the Spartan army at Plataea, they might have taken over all of Greece as well. Well, the Greeks never forgot that, so it was always kind of hanging over their head. And when Philip came to the throne and unified most of the Greek city-states by conquering them, basically, but he also wanted to give them a common vision. So his idea was they would attack Persia and exact revenge for the attack by Persia the previous century. Well, Alexander carried out his father's vision. He brought his army over from Greece into Persia, and in 3 titanic battles, he utterly routed the Persian king, the Persian king Darius, and he started sweeping westward, chasing Darius. Darius fled after the 3rd battle. He kept going east. Alexander kept following him. Now, when Alexander entered Bactria, that's this land way back up in here, mostly contiguous to modern Afghanistan. He was chasing Darius. He was chasing actually the killers of Darius. Darius's 2 of his satraps had murdered him. One of them was named Bessus, and the other was named Spinamontes. And they took refuge up in Afghanistan, which was thought to be unconquerable. It was a very tough nut to crack. Alexander followed him. Now, he wasn't 24 years old in 330 BC when he crossed into Bactria. And he had conquered the rest of the Persian Empire with almost ridiculous ease. I mean, he had, in just these 3 battles, he had swept through Egypt, he had swept through Syria, he had swept through Phoenicia. All of these, Asia Minor, all of them fell into his hand. And he decided that he wasn't just on a campaign of raid and plunder, as his father had envisioned, but he was going to conquer this land, and he was going to make himself great king in Darius's place. Now, here's a posthumous portrait of Alexander on a coin minted by his general Lysimachus. This gives him in the fullness of his manhood, and you can see the astonishing lifelike quality that a lot of these Greek coins achieved. And this is back in an age when they had no magnification, when they had no sophisticated metallurgy. How could they create something like this? It's far more lifelike and realistic than any coin you'd see today. Following the talk, there's a few actual Greek coins of this age, this Hellenistic age, in this little chest, this cabinet out here, and I'll be happy to meet you over there tell you about any of them. There is, in fact, a gold stater of this same type struck by Lysimachus. Well, when he went into Bactria, Alexander, I'm going to go back to this picture here. When he entered Bactria, Alexander couldn't have imagined that his toughest campaign would be ahead of him, because he'd absolutely crushed the Persian Empire in 3 years. Again, with almost ridiculous ease. But Afghanistan proved a much different situation. Little did he know that his most difficult campaign was ahead of him. His army suffered horribly in these campaigns. He found himself going back and forth across the same territory, having to reconquer it and resettle it several times. There were native uprisings in his wake. He had to fight the elements. His men were freezing in the mountains, roasting in the deserts. They were forced to eat their own pack animals to survive. The population was more difficult than the enemy they were facing. They adopted hit-and-run tactics. They would stick and move. They would use the ancient equivalent of the IED. Does any of this sound familiar? These are pretty much the same tactics that the Taliban and the Afghan guerrillas that the Soviets faced. These are pretty much the same tactics that they adopted. And Alexander was tied up in knots for the better part of 3 years. He traversed this territory trying to conquer it. He was aware that if he let this one area slip away, if he failed to conquer it, then the whole thing could unravel, because there would be uprisings everywhere. His aura of invincibility would be shattered. So he kept battling on. Finally, after 3 years, he was lucky that his enemies, Spidomanes, the satrap that had been serving as sort of the Osama bin Laden of the era, well, his enemies got as tired of fighting as he did. They killed Spidomanes. They brought Alexander his head, and Alexander hit upon a diplomatic masterstroke. He married the daughter of Oxymanes, who was one of the warlords of Bactria, and her name was Roxanne. And he encouraged all of his men, his thousands of soldiers that were in service at the time, to take Bactrian and Persian wives. He settled a lot of his veterans down in cities, which of course he named Alexandria. He built cities wherever he went. And then finally, after he had pretty much secured the situation, he decided to declare victory and move on. And he moved on to India, where he fought his last great battle against King Porus of India, victorious again. But even then, he had this vision of pushing on all the way to the end of the world. He was going to just keep conquering until he got all the way around the world. The Greeks did know that the world was round. And then he was going to take a ship, he was going to sail away, and he was going to come back to Greece that way. His men got one look at the enormous expanse of the Hindu Kush Mountains, and they said, no, we're not going any further. So, heartbroken, he made his way back to Babylon, where he drank himself to death, basically, in 323 BC at the ripe old age of 32. Now, there were no successors in his immediate line, in his immediate family, except for his half-witted brother Philip Aridaeus and his not yet unborn child to Roxanne. When he was born, they named him Alexander IV. But who really held power, of course, were the generals of Alexandria. He had a small coterie of generals, and these were all supremely talented men, and they were all extremely ambitious men. So for a while, they preserved the fiction of this unified empire, but they immediately started carving up the empire into their own little spheres of influence. The biggest of these kingdoms, or these Hellenistic kingdoms, was created by this fellow, Seleucus Nicator. Now, this coin is struck by Seleucus. It's not really sure if this is intended to be a portrait of Seleucus, or it's a portrait of Alexander, or it's some sort of a combined Greek hero combining the features of Seleucus and Alexander. It does look a little like Alexander, but there are portrait busts of Seleucus that looks like him as well. But he's wearing this unusual helmet, which is a very Eastern sort of a helmet. It's in Greek in form, but it's covered with spots. It's a panther skin covering it. And you'll also note that it's got this horn here, ox horn, probably a reference to Bucephalus, the ox head, the horse of Alexander the Great. And on the reverse here, we see Nike, the Greek goddess of victory, erecting a trophy. And there's his name, Seleucus, right over there. Now, Seleucus's kingdom was by far the biggest of these Hellenistic kingdoms. This is, here's Macedon. That's the kingdom that originally gave birth to Alexander, Philip. Here's the Ptolemaic kingdom, Egypt, ruled by Ptolemy, one of his other generals. This is the Seleucid kingdom. This enormous expanse going all the way from western Turkey here, Asia Minor, all the way to the gateway to Egypt, or gateway to India. And it includes Bactria, Afghanistan up here. And that sort of ghostly figure hovering in the background, that's Seleucus. Now, Seleucus couldn't rule all of this area personally. Remember, we had no radio telephones, no satellite phones, no mass communication. The only way he could rule this great territory was adopt the Persian method, and that was to use powerful local governors called satraps. And one of the satrap of the east, as time went on, Seleucus passed his kingdom on to his son, Antiochus I, who passed it on to his son, Antiochus II, and pretty much the kingdom remained intact. Around the middle of the 200s BC, a man named Diodotus was appointed satrap of Bactria, or the very easternmost part of the territory. Now, Diodotus did a very unusual thing. He started, instead of putting his king's portraits on the coin, he started off by putting his own portrait on the coin. This is not Antiochus. This is a portrait of Diodotus. He looks very different than Antiochus. But initially, he used the name. It says right here, Basileus, or King Antiochus. He starts off by putting his own portrait on the game, but still striking it in the name of the supposed overlord, King Antiochus. But by about 255 BC, by about the middle of the 250s BC, he felt secure enough to declare himself king. This silver coin, this is a silver tetragram, gold stater silver tetragram, has same portrait of Diodotus, but this one you'll notice says Diodotus, Basileus, King Diodotus. So now he's broken free completely from the Seleucid kingdom, and he's now ruling this new kingdom, which we don't know what they called it back in the ancient times. We have no idea what their name for this kingdom was. We call it the Greco-Bactrian kingdom. And this is the approximate expanse of it. We can't be certain about, exactly which territory fell under their sway, but it was an enormous kingdom. It was probably the single largest Greek kingdom of them all. And one important thing, one of the reasons Antiochus couldn't reconquer it immediately is he was tied up with the Parthians. Now, the Parthians were they were steppe nomads. They were people on the line. They were Iranian people under the Iranian culture. They were steppe nomads. They fought on horseback. They're fierce warriors, and they created sort of a feudal state. And very soon after the Greco-Bactrian kingdom broke free, they also declared their independence, and they conquered pretty much this large swath of territory here, which cut off the Greco-Bactrian kingdom from the west. So this is one reason you don't see you see very few references to this great kingdom to the east in any of the Greek writings of the people back in the Greek mainland. It was sort of out of sight, out of mind. It had been cut off from them, so they had very little knowledge of what was going on in there. Now, Diodotus seems to have ruled jointly with his son for a while, and his son may have succeeded him. This is Diodotus II. Looks very much like his father, just sort of a younger version of him. In fact, their coins are very difficult to tell apart, and some people still disagree exactly who is represented on them. But again, a very lifelike, realistic portrait. Their reign seems to have gone into the 220s BC when they were overthrown by this fellow. Like that little animation thing that was sort of the overthrow of the Diodotid dynasty by this guy, Euthydemus. Now, Euthydemus we do know a few things about. We can tell a few things from his coins right away, and we are lucky to have a very brief written account of his reign in the history of Polybius. We know we can tell two things about him. One, he was honest. That is because he reigned for probably upwards of 30 years, And whereas most rulers, if you look at their coins, at the beginning of the reign and the end of the reign, no change. They keep themselves looking young and fresh the whole time. Theodotus ages, and quite precipitously here. He looks like a fairly young, sturdy man in his prime here. But 30 years later, look at the toll it takes here. I mean, and the burden of rule and everything. You can see. I mean, he's obviously he's got old and jowly. His eyes are sagging. He's probably lost a few teeth. His hair's getting thin. But there it is at all, warts and all, right there on the coin. Again, remarkably realistic coin. We do know that during his reign, the king Antiochus III of the Seleucid kingdom tried to reconquer the Bactrian kingdom. He marched his army east. In 208 BC, he arrived in the kingdom of Euthydemus. He defeated Euthydemus in an open battle and then laid siege to him. Now, here's how we know he was stubborn. The siege went on for 3 years, and he did not give up. And in the end, King Antiochus III, Antiochus the Great, he is called, had to give up and go back, and he basically declared victory. He cut a deal, one of these marriage contracts again, where Euthydemus married his son off to the daughter of Antiochus, and then he went back to Greece to fight the Romans, alas, to lose in a great battle at the Battle of Magnesia in 196 BC. But Euthydemus, his reign went on, and his dynasty went on. Now, his son was Demetrius. We know about this because Polybius writes about Demetrius. We also know that Demetrius, who eventually succeeded his father, you can see the family resemblance here. I think there's Demetrius, there's Euthydemus. So they're definitely father and son. Demetrius got tired of ruling just Bactria and decided he was going to launch his own campaign of conquest, and he launched into India in a big way. In fact, he conquered just about the whole northern part of the Indian peninsula. And that fact is reflected on this unusual headdress he's wearing. As you can see, it's an elephant. It's an elephant skin. It's got the tusks. It's got the snout. It's got everything. And elephants figure prominently in his coinage of all denominations. This is a little bronze coin. And again, the elephant is quite prominently featured here. Now, we started up here in the Greco-Bactrian kingdom. Demetrius punched all the way down into India. He ran up against the Mauryaans, who were a very formidable state in their own right. But employing all the Greek science of war, he managed to conquer a good chunk of the northern peninsula and also all the way down here. And this all became part of his realm. And evidently in his wake, again, he had the problem of such a big area, only one man ruling it. So he decided to appoint sub-kings. Now, these are apparently all of his relations. We know he had a son, Euthydemus II, probably the son of Demetrius. Again, this is all guesswork now. We have all these coins. We only have a very few words written about it, so we have to sort of piece the history together. We can tell which coin came before the other. We can sort of discover by which layer a hoard of coins is buried in what occurred at certain eras, so we can see that this guy ruled about the same time as Demetrius, the elder Demetrius. He was probably the son of Demetrius. His reign is probably very short because he never gets any older on his coins. He still appears as this young, sort of fresh-faced young man, and his coins are fairly scarce. Then there was Pantaleon. His coins are a lot rarer even than those of Euthydemus II. His portrait coins are almost non-existent. There's probably fewer than a dozen of them known. But oddly enough, his other denomination coins are quite common, including this one, which is very unusual. It is the only ancient coin that is struck in cupro-nickel. It is not struck in silver or bronze, but cupro-nickel, which is a metal that the Greeks were not supposed to know about. There were supposed to be only a handful of metals known to the ancient world. Cupro-nickel was not one of them, the Western ancient world. The Chinese did know about it. They mined it, and they called it white copper. So evidently, this proves that there was a thriving trade between China and this Greco-Bactrian kingdom. Now this is the coin that actually started all for me. This fellow, Antimachos. He calls himself quite modestly Antimachos Theos, Antimachos the god. But he doesn't look much like a god. He looks like he looks like somebody you'd see just walking down the street. He looks kind of like a very self-satisfied Rotarian. He looks like a businessman. And in fact, when I was in high school, I was flipping through a book about ancient Greek coins, and I came across this one, this very portrait, and I had to laugh out loud because he looked exactly like our history teacher, Mr. McDermott. He was like a dead ringer for him. The same thing, the funny little smile on his face, the high arched eyebrow. All of this stuff is just isn't this a remarkable piece of portraiture? And from that moment, I was hooked on Greek coins. I started finding out everything I could about them. Just the thought that they could have created a portrait like this. His reign was probably 180 BC in that realm. So 2,190 years ago, they were producing coins of this quality. Really quite amazing. Now, we haven't said much about the reverses on the coins, but they are important, very important, because they tell us what these Greek kings, their patron god. Now, in this case, his patron god is Poseidon, the Greek god of the sea. He's standing there with his trident. The Romans refer to the same god basically as Neptune. The only thing is that Bactria is almost entirely landlocked. So where's the ocean? I mean, it sets up little mysteries. When I say empires of mystery, this is one of them. Why is he's paying homage to Poseidon, the god of the sea. There's no sea thousands of it's hundreds of miles between Bactria and the nearest sea. Bit of a mystery that. Next is Agathocles, and again, all these guys are ruling about the same time. Quite a bit thinner and a little bit more angry looking than Antimachus. He has sort of a mad gleam in his eye, which comes through in his coins. And then there's another one of these fellows wearing this funny Macedonian sun hat, sort of something you'd figure an old German burgomeister would wear, or something like that. This is Apollodotus. Now, Apollodotus, most of his coins are found in India, so he may have either succeeded or ruled jointly with Demetrius. We can't really say. But the coins are extremely rare. Portrait coins of this type are quite rare of Apollodotus, and this one sold at a recent auction for around $35,000, which actually, if it came to auction today, would probably be close to twice that, because they are very, very rare. Now, this dynasty was overthrown, again, as Euthydemus overthrew the dynasty of Theodotus. His dynasty was overthrown by this guy, Eucratides. Now, we don't really know much about him in terms of what his lineage was, except that we know the names of his mother and his father. And we know he started off fairly modestly. This coin is a fairly modest coin. He's wearing the kingly diadem. His patron gods are the Dioscuri, the Castor and Pollux, the heavenly twins, the sons of Zeus. They're riding on their horseback. And this is probably a good idea of what a Macedonian Greco-Bactrian cavalryman looked like at that time. Holding the couch spear, wearing the high helmet. But very soon, he one by one, Eucratides took on and defeated all of those other rulers in that previous panel, and absorbed all of their realms. And as his kingdom grew, his self-image seemed to grow. So you have this amazing coin, which shows him as this heroic, godlike figure with this big, huge, muscled back, with his back turned, hurling a spear, and wearing this helmet, which is very much like something you'd see a British campaigner of the 1890s wear. Like one of some Victorian British captain. And on the reverse, he is no longer just Basileus or King Eucratides. He's Basileus Megalos Eucratides. Eucratides, the greatest, not just the great, but the biggest and the greatest. Now, even Alexander never called himself Alexander the Great. He waited for his successors to do it. But Eucratides is calling himself the greatest. Now we come to the story of this amazing coin. This is the largest gold coin ever struck in antiquity, or ever recovered. Just to give you an idea, this is a 20-stater gold piece. It weighs 160 grams almost 6 ounces of gold. It is 62 millimeters in diameter. Just to give you an idea, this is a single gold stater, roughly on the same scale. This is a silver tetradrachm, which is a big coin. There's a couple of them sitting over there in the case here. It's a very large coin. It's dwarfed by this enormous gold medallion. Now, this gold medallion, the story of this is that in 1867, it was found apparently in a village in Afghanistan near the town of Bukhara. 6 men found it. As soon as they dug this coin up, they realized that this was something special. And each of them whipped out a knife. And the 6 men turned into 3 men, and then into 2 men, and then 1 guy ran off with the coin. Now the scene shifts to London, where a French numismatist who was under contract with the British Museum, he was having some lunch with some friends. And one of them told him an encounter with this strange, shabby beggar that tried to sell him this huge gold coin, and they were laughing about it because, of course, it had to be fake. No such gold coin could barely exist. But the Frenchman was aware. He asked him to describe it, and he was aware of the Bactrian coins that were just starting to reach the market at that time. He was quite well versed in them, and he realized that this probably wasn't a fake. It probably was a real coin. So the Frenchman went out and tracked down the beggar and sat him down in another little dark corner in a cafe. The beggar reached under his armpit and pulled out an old leather case that was all, well. And then out of the leather case came this huge gold coin. And the so-called beggar demanded 5,000 pounds. Now, this is 1867. 5,000 pounds buys an enormous estate. It's a huge amount of money. It is like it is the yearly salary of a mid-level nobleman. The Frenchman didn't have that kind of money, but he sat down and he wrote out a check for 1,000 pounds, and he put it between them, and he said, for the next 20 minutes, you can pick that check up. The price is $1,000. After 20 minutes, it turns into 800 pounds. 20 minutes after that, it becomes 500 pounds. And if it's still unsold after that, I'm not going to buy it at any price. So they stared at each other for 19 minutes. Then the beggar picked up the check, gave him the coin, and walked away. Now, there's a few amazing things about that story. One is that the guy would take a check, for 1,000 pounds, but I guess the Frenchman had a pretty good reputation. And then the Frenchman immediately, although he was working for the British Museum, somehow the coin didn't end up going to the British Museum. It went to the French Bibliothèque Nationale, where it still resides to this day. And he, at the time, wrote an article about it in which he said, this is definitely the most expensive coin of all time, which is probably true on a number of levels. One, 1,000 pounds is just an enormous sum back then. I don't think a coin had ever been sold for anything like that. But then you consider that 5 men lost their lives to bring this coin back to us, and it becomes more expensive still. Anyway, back to Eucratides the Great. Another one of his coins. This is what we call a dynastic coin, and there are coins of this type throughout the whole Bactrian series, where these rulers are paying homage to their relations, to their forebears, to their ancestors. Here's a Jugate bust of a man and a woman, and they're identified as Heliocles at the top and Kai Laodike. So that's his mom and his dad. Now the interesting thing is the father is not wearing a diadem. He's not a king. He could be a high-ranking general. He could be a powerful autocrat or a bureaucrat in the Bactrian state, but he wasn't a king. The mother, however, you can just see, and on some other examples of this coin, you can see it a little bit better. She does have a diadem, so she is of royal blood. So maybe that's where Eucratides got his pretensions of becoming a king. And however he obtained it, he overthrew the other dynasty, and he made that dream a reality. And he became the greatest king, again, here, Basileus Megas Eucratides. Now here is another coin. His coins are among the most common of all Bactrian coins. They find literally thousands of them. This is a bronze coin, and 2 interesting things about it. One, it's square, it's not round, which indicates the fusion of cultures again, because the Indians had a tradition of square coins. The Greeks adapted themselves to that. They created a series of square coins to serve as sort of small change. Not only that, but this coin is bilingual. The obverse inscription is in Greek. The reverse is in Indian. It's in an Indian script called Koroshti. And if you read it in Indian, it says Maharasha Eucratides. Now, what kind of place was it like? We've seen the pictures, portraits of the rulers, and even some of their ancestors. But for hundreds of years, these coins were coming out. People knew that there had to have been, and there are these little scraps of history that are left by the Greek and the Roman historians. So they knew there had to be some great civilization out there, and yet nobody could find any trace of it. For 100 years, even in the golden age of archaeology, from the mid-1800s to the mid-1900s, people were searching, combing Afghanistan, looking for a Greek city, some evidence that some kind of Greek culture had been there. They came up completely empty, nothing. It was as though the sands had swallowed it all. People even started talking about a Bactrian mirage, that this culture had produced coins, but somehow had left no trace of itself. And then, in 1961, the then king of Afghanistan, a fellow by the name of Muhammad Zahir Shah, who was the king of what was at that time a fairly peaceful Afghanistan, was doing a tour of his country. He came to a little village called Ai-Khanum in the northeast corner of Afghanistan, and as he was surveying the city, he noticed that there was an outline in the sand. And as he had some aerial pictures taken. He was a student of archaeology, very interested in the history of his country. He realized that here was the outline of a city. So he brought in archaeologists from France and from Russia, and they started excavating it, and voila, there it was, the first Greco-Bactrian city. And it was an enormous city. It was a big triangle, a mile on every side, huge walls, very sophisticated system, very broad roads, an acropolis, its own acropolis, a palace, an acropolis that would have easily swallowed up the one in Athens. A 6,000-seat amphitheater, very sophisticated drainage system, and a huge treasury. They found a big building which is evidently the treasury because they found some bronze blanks in there for striking coins. This is the citadel here. Treasury is located inside of that. Mosaic floor from Ai-Khanum. But that treasury had been looted. There was there was only a handful of silver coins that they found here and there, not anything like you'd expect to find around a major city. And from what they could tell, from the few remnants, from the few clues they could find, they figured out that this city had basically come down in one great crash in between 145 and 140 BC. Absolutely completely deserted, had been overrun, smashed. This enormous and beautiful and glittering, must have been a very impressive city, was completely almost smashed flat. Here's a few items that survived from Ai-Khanum. Fortunately, even amidst all the turmoil that's occurred in Afghanistan in the years since, these things are still safe. A lot of the treasures from Ai-Khanum are still safely reposited in museums around the world. However, the site itself has been completely desecrated. Unfortunately, it suffered the same fate as the ancient city after the Soviet invasion in 1978 and the civil war that came after that, and in the current war. It's been looted many times. It's basically, there's virtually nothing left of all this fine archaeological work that was done. Now, the scene, leaving that scene in Ai-Khanum, the Greco-Bactrian, we look down into India, because while Eucratides was busy conquering the Bactrian kingdom and pushing east, he again tried to push east into India. He ran right up against another Greek ruler who had been there. Evidently, he was a relation of the great Demetrius. His name was Menander. Now, he is the one Greek king who's entered Indian lore. He is said to have been a convert to Buddhism. And the Indians actually left a long treatise, a Buddhist treatise, written about this king. They called him Milinda, King Milinda. And they praise him to the heavens and earth. They say he was learned, eloquent, wise, and able. They say, as in wisdom, so in strength of body, swiftness, and valor, there was none found equal to Milinda in all of India. He was rich, too, mighty in wealth and property, and the number of his armed hosts knew no end. He had a long and successful reign. He stopped Eucratides, and he apparently pushed even further into India. But the Indians seem to have adopted to him warmly, perhaps because he did adopt Buddhism. He adapted himself to their culture. They adapted Greek ways. It was an amazing, for the time it lasted, enclave of this fused culture. We even find in a sculptural panel, this is probably the only Indian sculpture to depict a Greek king. This is probably intended to be King Menander, because he's got a very Greek-looking sword. He's dressed in the Greek fashion, and he wears the diadem of a king. This is very unlike depictions of Indians at the time. Clean-shaven. And here's there are many. These are very common coins of Menander of the Indian type. It's a lighter standard than this type. This coin is a Greek standard tetradrachm, weighs about 15 grams. This is a Indian standard tetradrachm, which weighs about 9 grams, but it's bilingual. See again the legend, Basileus Sotoros, or Savior, Menander, and in the reverse it says basically the same thing, Maharaja Milinda in Koroshti. And again, this is the tetradrachm. These are drachmas. These are very, very common coins. But the whole range of Greek portrait types are seen here. There's the bare-headed, the diadem head, helmeted head, the spear thrower. Now, while Menander was thriving, while the Indo-Greek kingdom was thriving, catastrophe was overwhelming the Greco-Bactrian kingdom. One thing we know about Eucratides is that he reached a bad end. There is a Roman historian named Justin who wrote a brief history of his reign, just one paragraph. And he says that in the end, while Eucratides had conquered more and ruled more gloriously than any of the other Greek kings of the East, he was eventually murdered by his own son, doesn't name the son, who then rode his chariot back and forth across his corpse until it rendered it limb from limb. And then they left the bloody body parts out there to wither away in the sun. So evidently he'd done something to really piss somebody off. Now, which of these, we know there are 3 Bactrian rulers after Eucratides, and this one was Eucratides' second, quite likely his son, looks like him, named Eucratides, probably his son. Was he the killer? We're not really sure. There's this other fellow, Heliocles, another son of Eucratides. Probably figured that out because his father was named Heliocles. Eucratides' father was named Heliocles, and it was quite traditional for Greeks to name their first male offspring after their father. So Heliocles the first is probably the son of Eucratides. Then there's this strange character, Plato, whose reign was very brief. His coins are extremely rare. This is one of the few portrait coins that exist. But it's interesting that the reverse type he has is the sun god driving this chariot, this rearing chariot. Now, is that possibly a reference to the whole scene of riding the chariot back and forth across the courts? Again, they're empires of mystery. We don't know. Well, the catastrophe, whether the murder of Eucratides sort of threw the door open and all the invaders started coming in, or whether the invasion started first and then caused the stresses that caused Eucratides to be overthrown, we don't really know. We do know that right around 140, the 140s BC, invasions started, big sweeping migrations. This one group, the Yuezhi, they were Chinese. They were steppe nomads, much like the Mongols, the later Mongols, the Huns. They had tried to attack China proper and had been repulsed. They probably ran up against the Great Wall. The Chinese had repulsed them. Then they turned around and they invaded Bactria. And this happened starting in 176 BC. They arrived in this upper corner. But by 155, 140 BC, they'd swept pretty much through the whole thing. And at the same time, the Parthians attacked from the west. And in the wake of the Yuezhi came the Scythians, who were basically based up here. They came sweeping down into Bactria as well. So from 3 different directions, the Bactrian kingdom was basically plastered. And you see the destruction at Iconium. You see the coinage starting to dwindle. You see very few coins struck after the reign of Eucrates. The coins of Eucrates II, Plato, and Heliocles are increasingly rare. And apparently around 125 BC, whoever was left decided to evacuate. So Bactria reverted to the Alans, the Scythians, and some of these people, the Yuezhi, and their coinage takes its cue from the Greek coinage. In some cases, it's quite sophisticated. The Yuezhi, they strike an imitative coin which imitates the portrait of Heliocles I. But it's in bronze, it's not in silver. The Scythians had more contact with the Greeks and with the Westerners, so their coins are rather more Greek-looking. The legends are pretty clean. They're written in Greek. It follows the same model as the Indic tetradrams. It's got the Indian writing on the back and the Greek writing on the front. And while it doesn't have a portrait per se, it does have a very nice standing image of this king. So this is Maues. He was one of the Scythians who ruled that region. Spalaiohors, again, keeping up the tradition of the square Greco-Bactrian coinage. And Azes, this is probably a pretty good picture of what the Scythians looked like on their horseback, on their mount. They fought from their horse, and it seems like every 500 years for most of history, a big wave would come out of the Central Asian steppe. You've got the Huns, and then the Mongols, and then Tamerlane, and it seemed to spawn these great horsemen who seemed to roll everything up in their wake. Well, that's basically what did in the Bactrian kingdom. Now, in India, Greek rule survived for quite a number of decades and even centuries after that. Here's some later Indo-Greek kings, Strato I and his wife, Agathoclea. So there's a royal couple depicted on the coins. Zoilus, Hippostratus, whose reverse looks very much like one of those Indo-Scythian coins. Amyntas. Now, Amyntas seems to have tried to push back into Bactria. There is the largest Greek silver coin. We've seen the largest Greek gold coin. The largest Greek silver coin belongs to Amyntas, and this was found in a hoard in 1946, the Kunduz hoard, and it is a coin that is the size of a pie plate. It's huge. It's about this big. It's a gigantic medallion, worth about 40 silver tetradrams. And then this other character, Lysias, his equipment seems to take a little something from every Greco-Bactrian king that came before him. He takes the helmet from Eucrates. He takes the elephant skin from Demetrius. He's got the spear-throwing pose of Eucrates. He's got this aegis here that Menander is seen to wear. So he takes a little something from everybody in his rather elaborate outfit. These are the last Indo-Greek rulers, Hermaios and Calliope, another royal couple depicted on their coins. Archibius, Zoilus. This fellow's reign, Strato, he seems to be the last Indo-Greek king, and as far as we can tell, his reign went down to about AD 10, so after Christ. So this was this is 350 years after Alexander. There's still a Greek king, rather haggard and rather severe-looking fellow, still probably harried on all sides, but still holding out there as a little pocket of Greekness in the middle of India. And then that kingdom was eventually absorbed into the Kushan kingdom. But the Indians that followed adopted a lot of the Greek ideas about coinage. Here's a coin of Kushan coin of Hieroas, who reigned concurrently and then after Strato. Looking, distinctively Indian, but still the reverse of the coin is still written in Greek, and it's got a lot of the same Greek sort of cultural, artistic concepts. Vima Cadphises, this was in a heritage sale earlier this year. Great big gold, double gold stater. Huvishka the First, and look at this fellow on the back. Looks like a Greek warrior. It's very much like a Greek god. Not only that, but beyond coinage, there's a Greek echo in a lot of the art of India, of Gandhara, of Afghanistan, for centuries thereafter. There are, even in the Buddhist art, in the Hindu art, you see very strong echoes of the Greek style. Like here we have Buddha in this Gandharan relief. But who's this standing next to him? Who's this naked strong man holding a club? This can only be Hercules, right? I mean, who's this going to be? And then this very attractive little celebratory scene here with the lady playing the lute and banging on the tambourine looks like a Greek Dionysic sort of procession. So this fusion of Greek and Indian culture, despite the eventual extinguishment of the Greek kingdoms there, it proved very durable. And the Greek and the Gupta and the Kushan rulers that came after them, and the Sasanians that took over much of the Afghan kingdom, took their cue in a lot of ways from the kingdom, from what had been left to them. And you can see echoes in those portraits of Buddha, those serene portraits of Buddha and the Hindu pantheon. You can see echoes of Apollo and Cybele and the Greek cousins down to this very day. So as a postscript to this tale, just get an idea of the enormous wealth coming down from that this kingdom created. In about 500 BC, long after the Greeks had gone, and while the Roman Empire was teetering on the brink and there was a lot of upheaval in the world, a group called the Hephthalites, or the White Huns, came sweeping through. There are more of those steppe nomads that seem to come around every 500 years or so. Swept through Bactria, swept through northern India, and back again. And they are plundering and looting as they went. They seem to have hit every temple along the way. And these temples had been repositories for wonderful gold. They've been treasuries and repositories, and they looted every single one of them they found. And then in a village near the Khyber Pass, they apparently just got tired of lugging all this stuff around, and they figured, well, we'll come back with the proper carts and everything and haul it. So they dumped it all into a well. For whatever reason, they never came back. In 1992, somebody was dipping water out of the well, and up came some silver coins. And people started investigating it, and immediately a curtain of secrecy fell over the whole area. The village was called Mir Zaka. It's in eastern Afghanistan. An Indian numismatist and scholar named Osman Boparachi, around the same time, all these coins started flooding onto the coin market. Just hundreds of coins appearing on the collector market. And remember, at the time, there was Afghanistan was being ripped apart by the civil war. You know, the post-Soviet invasion civil war, which then led, unfortunately, to the Taliban civil war, which then led to the war. The country has been ravaged by war, it seems like, since the late 70s. They began pulling these beautiful objects began appearing, and Boparachi made a pilgrimage to that site, and he very bravely, because that was a dangerous thing to do, he started asking questions about it, and the villagers proved somewhat willing to tell him what was, and they even took him to a room where there were sacks and sacks of ancient silver coins that were being unburied. And he got some of them to help him count them. He just wanted to get an idea how many there were there. Well, they stopped counting at 600,000. Reportedly, something on the order of 4 or 5 tons of gold and silver had been pulled out of this well in Mir Zaka. Where is it now? That's a very closely guarded secret. Some of it is supposedly residing in a couple of big Swiss vaults. Somehow they got it out of the country. And there is a collection of magnificent gold artifacts from this hoard, which goes all the way from early Persia through Kushan, India, including many, many beautiful things from this Greco-Bactrian era. They are now reside in a private museum in Japan. So they've made their way around the world. Think of that, 6 tons of gold and silver, 600,000 coins, and that's when he stopped counting. All this can represent only a tiny fraction of the total wealth of these destined empires of mystery. That's where I'll leave it. If anybody has any questions, I'll be happy to take them, and we can have a look at the coins themselves over there. Thank you. Yeah. Coin technology. Coins were invented actually in Lydia, in Asia Minor, now modern Turkey, sometime in the 600s BC. And a coin is basically was made then as it is made now. It is a piece of metal that is put between an obverse and a reverse die. The design is engraved into the die of the coin. There's a front and a back. A piece of metal is put between them. The obverse die is placed down. The obverse die is actually fixed to the anvil. The reverse die is a punch. You put the piece of metal and you hit it with a hammer. The dies are usually, the dies that they found are made out of case-hardened bronze, so they're engraved in bronze. The metallurgy is really quite complicated, and that's a whole other lecture. But how they dug these materials out of the ground and how they smelted them and refined them, it's really the technology involved is really pretty remarkable. And they achieved a really remarkable purity of metal. I mean, their ancient gold coins are 22, 23 karat gold. They're very, very pure. And the silver coins likewise. Now there are times when they debase them deliberately. They put, other, base metals in there because of economic troubles, just like they do today. And then you had that very strange cupro-nickel coin that was struck by Pantaleon. I mean, they were experimenting with different things. They had this metal, and well, the Chinese, evidently Chinese traders have brought it across. Why not try to strike some coins in it, see what happens? So we still have them. They could case harden bronze. They could engrave it, and then they could case harden it by heating it and then cooling it. That's a good question. I mean, iron obviously will cut bronze, so they might have used iron implements, or they might have used. Evidently, they knew about diamonds cutting glass because they were capable of doing glass work, very elaborate glass work. So they probably had. They might have had diamond-tipped implements to use. Unfortunately, they have found establishments that look like they were mints. They found the furnaces, anvils, hammers, and stuff, but never have they. And occasionally they will find a die. It's a very, very rare find, but they'll find a die. But never have they found all the tools that went into engraving it. I mean, it's a mystery. Some Greek coins can be very, very tiny. Some of them can be the size of a pinhead or smaller, and then you look at it under a loupe like a 10 power and you see this beautiful design. Now, how did they do that? Supposedly eyeglasses and magnifying glasses were invented after Galileo's time, 1,000 years later. How could they possibly have done this, unless these people were extremely nearsighted and they could get things really close? Or they might have used natural crystals. They might have used a globe filled with water, something that naturally magnifies things in order to. It's hard to imagine them doing it without some form of magnification. The Greek silver tetradrachm, the Greek silver drachma, and the tetradrachm, the larger of the two standards, was acceptable in any kingdom, any of these Greek-ruled kingdoms, because they all pretty much adhered to the same standard. A dram was about 4 grams. A tetradrachm, or a 4 drachma piece, was about 16 grams. And except in a couple of places, Egypt had a closed economy. They had a lighter coin standard, and if you went into Egypt from, say, the Seleucid kingdom, you have to turn in all your Seleucid money and get your, they had money changers, basically, just like cambio, today. You go from one country to the next, you have to change your money. They did the same thing in Greek times in certain closed economies. Yeah, it did. Yeah, but that's why their gold standard, the gold stater struck by all the Macedonian kingdoms was 8.5 grams. So it was standard throughout the entire, all these kingdoms. Macedon itself, Asia Minor, the Seleucid kingdom, the Greco-Bactrian kingdom, but Egypt, no. Egypt, they figured out. You see, Egypt, it was Ptolemy, the founder of the Egyptian kingdom, was a brilliant economist because he figured out that, hey, if you have to turn your money in and switch it, we make a little money off of that every time. So there was seigniorage, there was they took their profits off of it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, this is one thing that happens with speaking purely commercially about ancient coins. it can happen that a great coin that is a great rarity one day, they can find a hoard of it, and then suddenly it's not that rare anymore. That can happen in the case of, there was a Greek city called Oinowanda. It's a little city on the western coast of Turkey. These coins, there was only one of them known. It was in the British Museum. If you look in David Sear's book, Sear, Greek Coins and Their Value, it shows the coin of Oinowanda, and it says unique, because there's only one of them known. Well, about 10 years ago, a hoard of them showed up. And, of course, the first ones were immediately, wow, it's extremely rare, $10,000, of course, it's extremely rare. Well, then it became evident there's some hundreds of these coins, and maybe even 1,000 of them or so. And the price, it fell out of a tree, basically. But after a while, as in markets, they start to get absorbed, and then the price starts to creep back up again. So speaking purely commercially. Now, certain classes of coins seem to be immune to that. Alexander the Great gold staters, they're very, very common. I mean, it's amazing how many of them they find. They find hoards of hundreds and thousands of these coins. It just, the wealth of the ancient world was staggering. Alexander found so much gold in Persia when he conquered the Persian Empire. When he looted the treasury at Persepolis and pulled all this, and the Persians were not circulators. They were hoarders. They'd hoarded all this gold. They had huge reserves of gold. And the Greeks coined all this into money. And if you were a soldier of Alexander the Great, just an average infantryman starting in his army, when he mustered them out, he paid each of those guys a talent in silver, mustered them out with a talent. A talent was 6,000 drams. That was considered a king's ransom. And literally, a talent was a king's. If you captured a king in battle, you asked for a talent, and you got a talent. A talent was a king's ransom. And so each of these soldiers went back with a king's ransom, and the officers were paid many multiples of that. So they became fantastically wealthy. And this money just exploded all over the world after Alexander's conquest, and it really revolutionized the economy. It became, for the first time, a money economy, really spread, from all the way from Europe, from the shores of Europe, all the way to India. Yeah. Mm-hmm. They have. Yes. A lot of the mines in Bactria were native mines, as far as they can tell. But there was an extensive trade in silver, and even coins that crossed boundaries would be recoined. I mean, you'd basically melt it down or flatten it out and just put your own design over the old one. So that kind of thing happened. But in some cases they can trace the metal in a certain. It has a signature, like a nuclear signature. You can trace it to a certain mine, like a lot of the Athenian tetradrams, silver things that made Athens a great power, all came from the Laurion silver mines. They can pretty much trace that. I imagine they've done similar research to the coins of the Greco-Bactrian realm, but it's very difficult to work in there right now, as you can imagine, as what happened with Ai-Khanoum and some of these other great archaeological sites. I mean, you literally take your life into your hands when you go out there trying to do archaeological research. So I'm not sure at what stage they are in actually identifying the signature. But they do, the curious thing is the cupro-nickel can only have come from China. That they know that. So that had to have been somehow, there had to have been an extensive trade in metals, and the nickel must have come from China. Any other? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can debase it. Yeah. Well, it happened from time to time that some cultures started to debase the gold, and you see it, when like Carthage, powerful city-state that fought Rome for a long time. They initially started out with a gold coin, and then as the wars and the stringency started to take effect, they started putting more and more silver into it. And the coin, you can see it. you could line these coins up from different eras. You could see them start gold and get a little bit paler, and by the end they're almost all silver. But and the ancients were certainly aware of this. I mean, they knew that this coin was not as fine as that one, and they probably did have their tests and their and there were probably actually there are certainly they have references just in the ancient world. They'll say, now I won't take that one. That's an early one, or if you're going to give me that one, you're going to have to give me 3 of those to equal one of these. So I mean, they were aware when debasement happened, and that was always regarded as an evil process. Once you started it, you just never knew where it went. So most of the healthy ancient cultures tried very hard to keep the purity of the coins. Occasionally they might let the weight slip or something like that, but a gold coin was always supposed to stay as near to pure gold as possible. And if there was debasement, then you paid a price. There was a price in the purchasing power of it. Gold content. For ancient coins, it's not that the actual weight of the gold in the coin has very little, impact on the value of the coin, almost none. But in certain series, if the debasement does occur, it just seems like the ones that are pure gold do sell for more. So it's not a cut and dried thing. If you see an electrum stater that, a base gold stater that's in beautiful style and beautiful condition, it could sell for very much more than a gold one. But there is sort of a general rule of thumb that the base metal coins are going to be a little less valuable. But there's no sliding scale. It's just sort of a rule of thumb. So, sure. Mm-hmm. I think that mid-Bactrian period that goes, I think all the Bactrian periods down into the reign of Menander I think as portraits, they're amazing works they're almost photographic in their realism and all the different poses and everything. This is my favorite class of Greek coins. It always has been, ever since I saw that one in the book. A lot of what we regard as beautiful is sort of a cultural bias. People raised in the Indian tradition of art might look at the coin of Huvishku and think that hey, that's some of these are I find some of these quite they're this fellow here. I mean, in his own way, he's quite as grand as some of the Greco-Bactrian fellows. I mean, he's not afraid to put himself pretty much as he is on the coins. And it's just a different artistic tradition. It's not as what we'd say is, but some of these later Greek coins are obviously there's a decline in the artistic quality of the coins. You could call it a decline or what's the word I'm searching for here? Decadence. It's approaching. It's an art that's entering its decadent phase. And it's in its purest form, but even as late as this is still a pretty strong, powerful portrait here. And some of these again are these are starting to lose a little of their lifelessness and realism. But to me, some of the greatest portraits are on these coins of like Menander here, with the big muscled back, wearing the aegis over his shoulder, and Eucratides, and always that fantastic. I always have to go back to the coin of Antimachus. I just love this guy. That fellow and this guy. I mean, they captured the soul of the man on the coin. You know very little. You don't know much about this guy historically, but you can tell a lot about his personality just by looking at the coin. I mean, he's very self-satisfied, but he's not he's not too pompous. He's kind of jovial about everything. Life is kind of easy for him. He's kind of a happy guy. So, he's very alert. He's got his eyes a bunch. He just sort of takes everything in and just takes it all in with a little smile. And it's amazing that they could capture that. So that, to me, this is my favorite period of Greek coin portraiture, is this early Hellenistic Bactrian era where you get the really fabulous, strong, powerful, lifelike portraits. You're welcome.
David is out from our Beverly Hills office. If you reach him there if you have any questions. And your sale is on January 3rd?
January 3rd, Heritage holds and we'll have several of these Bactrian coins in there. So go out there. That's going to be in New York City at the Waldorf Astoria at j.com.